Turn that light off in the background.
No, I think it's good. Okay. You're good. We are live. Hey guys, it's First Draft Friday. I brought to you by Authors AI. I'm Alessandra Torre, and I'm here today with Cindy Skaggs, and we are going to be talking all about creating side characters and what you need to know about your side or secondary characters. So this is something I personally am really excited for, and I know a lot of you have communicated in the Facebook group and on YouTube and are excited too. So without further ado, we are going to jump right in. Cindy, can you introduce yourself and share a little bit about you?
Sure. So I am a total writing geek. I've always wanted to be a writer, and I didn't give myself permission. And I think a lot of people experience that because creativity is not encouraged in our culture. So when I finally decided to get serious, I went and got 2 degrees in creative writing because I felt like it would make me so much better at it. I don't know. And so a lot of my writing or a lot of my classes that I teach are based on what I learned there. I am published. I've got 8 published novels, but I also write in literary fiction. I write in literary nonfiction, and teaching is probably the favorite thing that I do. So I teach a lot of classes, both at the college level and then community level.
And are most of the books you've published literary fiction, or is there a certain genre that they're in?
They're romantic suspense, and it's kind of funny because it's so counter to what everything I learned in my education. I mean, writing is writing, but they're so kind of anti-genre fiction in academics that people are like, oh, you write genre fiction.
I love that. I have a romance background, so yeah, so we're in good company. And my dog's in the background too, so it's a family affair.
Sorry about that. They get excited when people come to the door.
That's the beauty of a live show. So and for those of you watching, feel free to ask questions as we go. As always, we'll be taking your questions and working them in when we can. So please don't be shy. If you have a question for Cindy, shout it out as we go. I think, yeah, they're barking. I can talk over. It's fine.
No, that's okay. I can talk over them. This happens all the time. So really what I want to talk about minor characters is we tend to misuse them in writing because we want to make things easy. We want to kind of grease the wheels for our character to get into either more trouble or out of trouble. And so we make minor characters these sort of props instead of making them real people with real lives. And so just using myself as an example, my first published book, the main character has a son, and he is 100% a prop. He is just there to be endangered, so she has a reason, but he's not a real person. And so one of the things I like to do is to play with the minor characters because they add so much depth to our stories, and they can do it in a really concise space. And that's kind of what we're here to learn about today.
Okay, so by concise space, you're talking about giving them impact and giving them life and development, but without taking up a lot of page space.
Exactly. So one of the things they can do is they can help to define your theme. And so I use examples from movies instead of books because it's more likely that we've watched the same movies than read the same books. And so if you look at something like Harry Potter, God, every character, every dark arts teacher essentially tells you what the theme of that particular book or movie is going to be. And they do it in a very small way. Like there's a scene in the 3rd movie. I'm a geek when it comes to Harry Potter. So we watched it over weekend. We were snowed in for a weekend and we watched all the books again, or all the movies again. And there's a scene where Mr. Weasley comes up to Harry and he says, I want you to promise not to go after the Sirius Black. And he said, why would I go after somebody who wants to kill me? And that's the whole plot of the movie in one really, really short scene. And so that's what we want to do with our minor characters is he's a real living character with family. He's there because he's getting his kids their school supplies, but then he's also there to help define the theme of the book and the movie. And so that's kind of how you want to use them, is to make sure that they're living, breathing human beings with a real purpose other than making life easy for the protagonist.
Or hard for the protagonist. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So they should also give you conflict. And so, God, the minor characters can add conflict just by being in the way. If you think about Malfoy in those books and movies, he is 100% there to create conflict and make life difficult for the protagonist. And that's what we want our minor characters to do. And we hate Malfoy because he is this living, breathing embodiment of everything we hated about school. And so that kind of life is what you want to do with all of your minor characters. Even if it's just the police officer who, you know, wraps the victim in a blanket, he should feel as if he's a realistic person. And one line from that character can then spur more conflict or de-escalate the conflict.
So how do you do that? So how do you give your side characters life? I mean, because a lot of times you only have maybe a couple of interactions with them, and how much is too much life? Like, I mean, I'm assuming we don't need to share the backstories. You know?
No, but you should probably know what it. You should probably know them. I have another movie that I use frequently is Moonstruck. And there's a minor character in the very opening. She's at the airport. The main character's at the airport. And there's this old woman that's at the airport watching the plane, you know, in the olden days when we could actually go down the concourse. And they're watching the plane depart. And the old woman says, "I put a curse on that plane." And she has like 2 or 3 lines. She says, "I put a curse on that plane." She tells you why, you know, she just put her sister on that plane and she hates her sister. And so she's there for a living, breathing purpose because her sister's on that plane. But the idea of curses and it sort of foreshadows a lot of the events that are going to happen. And this character has less than 30 seconds in the movie. And so it's just making sure that you write them very concise and that you almost create like a flash fiction scene where you just have this one moment of intensity with that character and then let them go. In the same way that you randomly meet people, you know, the woman who's throwing a fit at the bank. We don't know why they do it, but they certainly changed our day. And so that's the way we want our characters to be, is there for a real reason, but they're in and out very quickly in the course, and they're just really ramping up the tension and the conflict for your protagonist. And so what happens sometimes is we have a character, it's like almost like they're manipulating us, or we're puppets, and they're saying to your character, you know, you should go here and figure this out. And that's not how we want them to live. We want the character to have to figure things out themselves. And so if things are going really well for the protagonist, we want to throw a wrench in there through a minor character. And it can be as simple as, you know, an altercation, or something that makes your character start to doubt their purpose. And it can be just in passing, you know, it's like that friend who says, "Oh, that's interesting what you're wearing." And suddenly we like, do I need to go home? Is it that bad? Am I, you know, so that's the kind of interactions we want, where they're real. And so to give you like another example, I have different roles that these characters can do in there too. So minor characters have minor roles, or major, you know, sort of side roles. And what got me interested was, as a series writer, some of my characters are minor characters in one book, but they're the main character in the next book. And so how do I make them real enough to be interesting for the reader to want to read the book about them, but not have them take over? And so they can act as sort of a shadow for the main character, which just means they have their own agenda and they're doing their own thing at any given time, or they can be a model. So sort of like, this is who I could be. I think Harry is given, in the Harry Potter movies, he's given a lot of characters that he can be. He could be, he's never going to be that, he's never going to be a Weasley. Like, he's never going to be a kid without a mission, but he could turn out like Tom Riddle, who becomes Voldemort, or he could be like Snape, which we don't realize until the very end isn't as bad as he seems, or he could be like Neville Longbottom, and they're definitely mirror characters throughout. And Neville, especially in the earlier books, he's hardly ever there. He just is there as that block. Like when he tries to block the three characters from going out after dark because he's going to get they're going to get the house in trouble. You know, he's very much a rule follower, and that's shown kind of throughout the book, but he's never given a lot of screen time or page time. But we kind of know what Neville stands for, that he's a rule follower and he has certain expectations of the main characters.
That's a great, so I love that. And I love that you brought up series, because a new author just asked me this week, you know, what do I do? I have these side characters and they're going to have their own book. How much should they be in the book? How much, you know, should they be a part of it? And it was like, well, you don't want the situation where they're just continually present for no reason whatsoever. And it's so obvious that this character is obviously going to have a spin-off book, because there's no reason that they're continually present with no purpose whatsoever. So that was the only thing I urged her is, yeah, like if they're there, give them a purpose.
Yeah. So one of the things we can do with those side characters is, I write suspense. So there's always, you know, meetings, or they need, you know, somebody's help to steal a car or, you know, build a bomb, whatever it is. And so I call on the characters who have that expertise. So if they need to break into the computer, they call one character. If they need somebody who's a sniper, they call a different character. So by giving them specialties, you give them a reason to be part of the action. And one, if you're into, particularly with series, if you look at movies like Ocean's 11, where it's an ensemble cast, but obviously, at least in the first ones, George Clooney is the main character, but they all have their specialties. And so even if you're not writing suspense, they still have specialties. They have connections or friends, or they behave a certain way, like certain of our friends have barbecues or parties, or, you know, they're the ones who introduce you to your next future boss. Like everybody has their specialties, and that's what you want to do, is incorporate them when they're necessary and let them just kind of be in the background for the rest of the time.
I think the Avengers does a really good job of that, because like with each of the movies, the characters are so distinct. And even if they're only in that scene for one argument or whatever, you can still remember them. So when their movie comes out, you're like, oh, that's, you know, Captain America, you know, or that's, you know, Thor or whatever. And I remembered that one thing, but they all have very different personalities and very different specialties, like you said, and backstories.
And then give them quirks. Like I have a computer guy who's, for 3 books, all he was there was to be a computer genius, which is handy to have. But he always was playing with things. He would have a fidget spinner. You know, it could be a Rubik's Cube or a computer device or something he's trying to fix. And so he always has this sort of nervous tick that he does. And then when he becomes the main character, then you can explore why he has that tick. And he becomes even more full-bodied. And then in future series, when characters see that, they're like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. And so you're giving them quirks that aren't annoying, because I've read some where, you know, if the character drinks orange juice every morning, that's probably not enough to embody that character. It really should be something inherent in who that person is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that tip. That's a great one.
And then another thing that minor characters can do is act as a catalyst. In the Harry Potter movies, for instance, first Hagrid is definitely a catalyst. Like he's just there to change Harry's life and bring him into the wizarding world. But every dark arts teacher is sort of a catalyst for a new direction that the movies and the character are going to go. And so they're acting as a way to change. Human beings don't want to change. And in books, change is the purpose. And so these minor characters can be the catalyst for change. There's a reason the character isn't doing certain things, and they're resistant. We're comfortable where we are. Even if we're unhappy, we're comfortable in that unhappiness. And so the minor characters push you out of that comfort zone. And so one of the things we say is, if the character is unhappy where they are, then your minor characters should be extremely happy where they are, and they should model for your character a life lived fully that makes that main character want that kind of life. So they're kind of modeling what they could be, and they're foreshadowing, you can stay where you are, and then there's a character that you demonstrate that is in stasis, that isn't changing, and it becomes a warning. You could become this. You could get stuck here.
So when you're writing a book, how many main characters would you, side characters, or is there such thing as too many, or can you overkill it? Is it better to have like 2 or 3 consistent side characters throughout that book, or is it better to have different people coming in and out of this character's life, and each one is giving them a different perspective, or stimulating or motivating them in different ways? Or does it depend on the book?
It depends on the book, and I think it comes very organically. And one of the things about studying this is that, we learn these different techniques and why we use them, and maybe we go back and we revise an existing work to add or use this more intentionally. But then over time, hopefully we start to internalize it and we bring these characters in naturally. And so in my last book, I accidentally had these 2 female characters. They just sort of popped in. This one was a neighbor, and she just walked out into the hall when my character was coming home, and I thought, who is this woman? And I realized after I finished the book that she was the warning. So she would sort of pop out of her, she's the nosy neighbor that pops out of her apartment. And she was the warning, like, if you're going to stay where you are, this is your future. You're going to be this lonely old woman with cats bugging the neighbors. And then there's another character who is a very strong, independent working woman that can be a model of this is where you can be. And so both of these represent 2 sides of what the character can become, depending on what her choices are. And then I have other minor characters that exist, some of them as red herrings, and some of them are spies that we don't necessarily know about. So it kind of depends on the book. I've read dozens or more romantic suspense where it's really just, the hero, the heroine, and the antagonist. But I think adding those side characters gives depth to the story that you miss if you're not there, because they can do things that your protagonist can't do. They can be weird and random and kind of creepy, and your main characters can't really be those things. So I would say there's no too many. Too many is what you have a hard time juggling. And the place where it becomes really obvious is a chase scene or fight scene, particularly in novels, because it's hard for the reader to track who is who. So you don't want to get outside of your skill set, and you don't want to make it so hard for the reader to remember who that character is. And that just grows as your skill set grows.
Yeah, my early novels, all of my main characters in early novels were all romance. Were all like orphans. Like none of them had because I was too lazy to write and deal with parents and with engagements and stuff like that. It was like, oh, they're gonna have to meet the parents, and I just didn't want to create more characters. So I all of my characters like had no parents, or they were estranged from their parents or whatever. So but I think that was me being lazy, and not wanting to make my world too big, because like you said, dealing with your skill set, like I was aware of my limitations. So I played inside of them.
And that's a very Disney-ish trope. Like if you almost every Disney movie ever, until probably the last 10 or 15 years, they're orphans, because it's just easier. They're more susceptible to bad things happening, I think, when they don't have parents. In the same way Bambi was endangered because his mother was dead, so are our characters when they have no family. They have, they don't have that.
Lion King, like a lot of orphans. Yeah.
And then over time, it's fun to play with these minor characters and have them show up in weird and random ways, to get our characters thinking about their own limitations. We do that within our lives. We have people who, I did this a lot to my kids. My poor kids are, being a child of a writer is challenging. And I would use examples, like if one of their friends did something really stupid, they would become my example. And that's what minor characters are, is they're that example for your main protagonist, but they're also, they can be a model. Like if you have, my son's best friend is just realistically one of the nicest kids I've ever met. And so he becomes the model to a certain extent. And then if my son is the character, there's probably resentment against that model for having that sort of perfect character. And so if we think about our own personal interrelationships and interconnectedness, we can start to pull out characters that represent both that teaching moment and also sort of that resentment that we have for people who are held to the light a little bit above us.
A really great example that I think fits this, and you can tell me if I'm off base, but I use the film Pretty Woman a lot when I'm using examples. And Richard Gere's best friend, or I don't know if they're best friend, is Jason Alexander. I don't know what their characters' names are, but he's a bald man if you've watched the movie. And thinking through this, like, he's a great side character, and he really helps both the hero and the heroine look at things in different ways. But I think now that I'm listening to you, I think he kind of gives Julia Roberts' character a glimpse into kind of the dark, ugly side that Edward could possibly become, which is, focused on money and, taking her for granted or treating her like a prostitute, So it is, now that I'm looking at it through that lens, I can kind of see, I already thought he did a bunch in that movie as a side character, but I can also see where he could cause her to look at Edward in a different manner. And I was really always only thinking about him challenging Edward's relationship with her, and why do you like this girl, and why are you with her, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and then using that same movie, the friend of Julia Roberts is she's the warning. This is what could happen if you stay in this lifestyle.
Yeah, I love that. Someone in the audience says Casablanca is an excellent example of fully fledged side characters, some for comic relief, some for poignancy. And I love comic relief side characters like that always, especially if you have kind of a darker, more gritty book. I'm sorry, I almost said movie. It can help to, give some comic relief.
Yeah, and we forget that if you're writing very intense situations, the reader needs that comic relief to take a breath and handle whatever event or situation's happening. You see it. They're usually the most beloved characters, the comic relief characters.
I love that. And Jerry Maguire, like, there's that one athlete where he's like, "Show me the money, Jerry," and he really challenges Jerry Maguire, and he is just funny. Like, every time he comes on the stage, you kind of perk up, or every time he comes on screen, you kind of perk up to see what happens next. Someone from Facebook said, "How deep do you go when you develop a side character? Like detailed personality, backstory, looks." Looks is a great thing. Do you describe what they look like?
If it's pertinent, I say the writer should always know more than the audience does. For my characters that I know are going to show up repeatedly in the series, I have to know what all of those things about them. If they're just transiting through, like I have a character who starts a book, she's followed by sort of this creepy grad student, and he's really there as a catalyst because she's been pretty comfortable and she's hiding. And so his physical details are very minimal. He's kind of greasy, he's wearing dirty clothes, he's kind of sketchy looking, but I don't go into a lot of detail. But then the two ladies who act as the warning and the example, I go into more detail because it matters more. So that's really where you ask yourself is this transit? Is this somebody who's transiting through, or is this somebody who's going to be here that we need to know more about?
And I really like what you just said, like, does it matter? So does their backstory matter? If it matters, I agree, you should know more than the reader, but as far as what to share with the audience, does it matter? And if their backstory matters, then you need to share it, or if it makes Tom, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so the character that I have who's shadowing her, he's there for a legitimate purpose. He's trying to get sponsored into the PhD program. And so he's doing a favor for somebody else. And so he has a story reason for being there. He's not just somebody that I make up to force her to change. He has a real reason. And that's really the key, is that that's clear to the reader so they don't feel gypped.
So when you say feel gypped, what would be something an author would do that would be wrong? Like if we were saying do's and don'ts, what's something that would cause the reader to feel cheated? Is he a red herring, this character?
No.
Okay.
No. And I don't mind using minor characters as a red herring necessarily. Where readers feel gypped is if there's no way that they could know. So in other words, every Agatha Christie book, the reader has no real chance of figuring it out because all the clues aren't on the page. And that worked in that particular era. But now if you don't give the information so that when the denouement happens and the reader goes, oh, of course, then you're gypping the reader. The other thing is if you make that minor character a lie, readers are not friendly to being manipulated. And so if they feel like you lied to them in some way for a cheap joke or cheap trick, then it becomes a problem, because then they feel like almost like you're the unreliable narrator.
Mm-hmm. Tom said, does this all apply to short stories too, in terms of side characters?
Very much. And in short stories, you have even less space. And if you're writing short stories, I would encourage you to practice flash fiction, because it teaches you how to be that concise. There's a new website I just found. It's probably been around forever, but I just found it. It's called 100-Word Stories. And it really helps you figure out how to condense the information for maximum tension, and then also for creating a character really, really quickly. And so if you're involved in short story writing, try to write a flash piece about a minor character and see how concisely you can explain that character and his purpose in the story.
Carol said, would it be correct to say a mentor could be a secondary character?
Oh, very much so. Like Dumbledore is very much a minor character or a secondary character. And he's almost always a catalyst for things. He doesn't explain things. He's a trickster by a lot. And I think the reason we put up with him being a trickster is that underneath it all, he does have a genuine affection for Harry. If we got to the end of the movie in the series and we figured out why he kept Harry alive so long, and he didn't have genuine affection for Harry, I think we would be really offended by that series. But because he has cared for Harry for, the 7 books or the 6 books before he dies, we kind of let that trickster nature of his pass.
Is there any danger in a side character stealing the show, like and really winning the reader's hearts and taking attention off of the main character, and then caring more about the side character, even if the side character is only in half of the number of scenes, or 30 or 40% of the scenes? Is that bad, or is that something an author should be concerned about, or is it a good problem to have?
A little bit of both. And again, it depends on the intention in the book. I had a character that I was going to kill off, and readers fell in love with him, and I couldn't kill him off. And that was a problem for me story-wise. It created all kinds of conflicts for me. If they like the side character more than your main character, you're probably in trouble. So it's just a matter of, and in that case, maybe write a side story for that character so they can have the spotlight. But it's like anything else in life. If you are running a show and somebody comes in and doesn't let you speak at all, it's a problem for your show. And so our books are the same way. If somebody is doing most of the emotional work in a story and they're not the main character, you might consider if they should be the main character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I love that. And we're already out of time. Do you have any last tips or something you didn't get a chance to share that you want to share before we sign off? And if anyone has any final questions, speak now, or else your opportunity is lost forever.
So one of the things I would say is to think about a story in progress where you have a character that isn't moving forward and they're in what we call stasis. And then try to write the scene in which a secondary character gives that character a glimpse of a possible future, and start to think about how your characters are moving or not moving on the page. My mother used to quote Sir Isaac Newton all the time. And one of them is, an object at rest will stay at rest until acted on by an outside source. And your minor character is that outside source, and they are pushing your character towards something. And so you want them to help with the growth of your character.
I love that. I've never thought of minor characters in that way. I've always thought of them as adding comedic relief or increasing or decreasing pacing, or helping you to see the main character in a different way. But I've never thought of them as showing grass is greener, or an eventual demise. So I love everything you've taught. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. Thank you for everyone who joined First Draft Friday live. If you enjoyed the show, come back in 2 weeks. And if you're watching or listening on a podcast or on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. Authors AI hosts First Draft Friday, and it's all about craft. So our talks are always 100% focused on the craft of writing great fiction. So thank you so much, Cindy. If you're interested, if someone wants to read one of your books, is there a book that you would suggest that they start with? You can visit her website. It's here, cskaggs.com.
So probably the first in series is Live by the Team. Realistically, the one I just came out with, Die by the Team, is a much stronger book, and it uses minor characters in the way we talked about today.
So the second one you mentioned was Die by the Team. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
And they can read it out of order. They can read that one first, or?
Yeah. Because I had my editor for this particular book has not read the rest of the series. And so I made sure that it was something you could jump into and follow along.
I love that. All right, guys. Thank you so much. It's been so great to have you. And we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.